The sun hung high in the sky, beating down mercilessly on the endless stretches of sand and scrub. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, making it impossible to tell where the road ended and the horizon began. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, as the old car coughed and sputtered. Every few seconds, a puff of smoke escaped from under the hood. She had been driving for hours, hoping to reach the small town that was supposed to be just a few miles ahead, but now it felt like an impossible dream. Her throat was dry, parched beyond comfort, and her lips were cracked from lack of water. She reached into her bag, pulling out a nearly empty bottle, but it offered only a few desperate sips. The desert was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to avoid this lonely stretch of road, leaving her with only the relentless sun and the growing panic in her chest. She glanced in the rearview mirror, half hoping to see another car or a familiar face, but the road behind her was as empty as the world around her. She tried the car again, turning the key, but it only gave a weak groan before dying entirely. Her heart sank. There was no cell signal, of course. She had expected adventure, a break from the routines of her life, a chance to see something beautiful and wild. She hadn't expected to be stranded in the middle of nowhere with the heat pressing down like a weight, her body craving water and the fear of being alone beginning to creep in. She stepped out of the car, the soles of her shoes sizzling against the hot pavement. She could feel the heat rising from the asphalt, burning her feet through the thin fabric. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, rocky hills in the distance, sand dunes rolling like waves, and a sun that seemed determined to make her regret every step she had taken. She shaded her eyes, scanning for anything that might look like life, a house, a car, a person, anything. But the desert was vast and unyielding. Her mind wandered back to the choices that had led her here. She had wanted freedom, a break from the suffocating expectations of the city. She had packed lightly, eager for a journey that promised excitement and new experiences. She had imagined the thrill of wandering off the beaten path, the beauty of solitude, and the quiet satisfaction of testing her own limits. But she hadn't imagined this. She hadn't imagined fear. She hadn't imagined the terrifying feeling of being completely alone, with the world stretched wide around her and no one to call for help. Her steps grew heavier with every movement. She tried to ration the little water she had left, sipping slowly and then putting the bottle away, knowing it would not last long. The heat made her feel dizzy, her vision swimming in wavering waves of light. She wanted to sit down, to rest, but she knew that staying in one place might be just as dangerous as moving. Her body was tired, aching, every muscle protesting, but she kept going, one step after another, forcing herself to move forward in the hope that the road might lead her to safety. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. The sun lowered slightly in the sky, but the temperature didn't offer much relief. She tried to think rationally, tried to keep her mind busy with small plans and strategies, but fear was always there, lurking behind every thought. What if no one came? What if she couldn't make it through the night? She had heard stories about people lost in the desert, about travelers who wandered too far and never returned. She had never thought she could be one of those stories. And yet, with every passing minute, the possibility grew more real, more terrifying. She collapsed against the side of the car, breathing hard, feeling the sweat run down her back and stick her clothes to her skin. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust across her face. Her eyes wandered across the barren landscape, trying to find something familiar, something human, something that could remind her she was not completely alone. But the desert was silent and still, offering no answer, no comfort, no hope. She tried to shout, calling for help, but her voice cracked in the dry air. The sound of her own desperation echoed faintly against the rocks, quickly swallowed by the emptiness around her. She sank to the ground, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to catch her breath, trying to calm the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her, a deep, aching despair that made her question every choice that had brought her to this place. The day dragged on. Shadows grew longer and the temperature began to drop slightly, but the relief was minimal. She knew the desert could be just as dangerous at night as it was during the day, with cold winds cutting through her thin clothing and darkness hiding every potential danger. She tried to stay alert, tried to keep her mind focused on the small things, counting steps, tracing lines in the sand, anything that might keep the fear at bay. But her body was exhausted, her strength waning, and the thought of not making it through the night loomed like a shadow over every breath. Then, as the sun began to dip closer to the horizon, she saw something in the distance, a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong to the rocks or the dunes. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick of the heat and the light, but it grew more distinct, more deliberate. She squinted, trying to make sense of it, her heart beginning to beat faster with a mix of fear and hope. Was it another traveler? A passerby? Someone who could help her? The figure drew closer, and she could finally make out the shape of a person on horseback. The cowboy's hat cast a shadow over his face, but there was an unmistakable calmness in his movement, a sense of control that immediately made her feel a little less afraid. He rode steadily, not hurriedly as if he had all the time in the world, and yet the presence of another human being filled her with relief so intense that she almost cried. He slowed as he approached, bringing the horse to a gentle stop a few feet away. He studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp and attentive, then spoke in a calm, reassuring voice, asking if she was all right. She could barely speak, her throat raw from the heat and her cries for help earlier, but she nodded, grateful for the sound of someone's voice, for the fact that she was no longer alone. He dismounted carefully, tying the horse nearby, and walked over to her, offering water from a canteen he had carried. She took it with trembling hands, drinking deeply, letting the cool liquid soothe her burning throat. She felt a little strength returning to her limbs, a little clarity returning to her mind. For the first time in hours, she could think clearly, could imagine a way out of this nightmare. The cowboy examined her carefully, noting the signs of heat exhaustion and dehydration. He spoke gently, offering advice on how to rest and conserve her energy. He didn't ask questions or make assumptions, simply acted with competence and kindness, a steady presence in a world that had seemed so frightening and indifferent. She found herself trusting him immediately, feeling an unexpected sense of safety in the desert that had moments before felt like a trap. As he helped her to her feet, guiding her carefully back toward his horse, she noticed the way he moved, confident, steady, skilled. She realized that he was not just a passerby. He knew this land, understood its dangers, and could navigate it with ease. Every step beside him made her feel less vulnerable, less alone. She clung to that sense of hope, walking with him as he led the horse and offered words of encouragement. By the time they reached a shaded area under a cluster of desert trees, the sun had begun its slow descent behind distant hills. He helped her onto the ground, setting up a small makeshift shelter with a blanket he carried, shielding her from the remaining heat. She lay down, exhausted, and for the first time felt a glimmer of safety, a feeling that she might actually survive this ordeal. They didn't talk much at first. She drank more water and he simply watched over her, alert to any sign of trouble. The quiet companionship was comforting. She felt seen, cared for, and protected in a way that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was strange, this sudden connection with a stranger in such a desolate place, but she knew it was real, and it was exactly what she needed. As the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped slightly, she felt her eyelids grow heavy. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax, to rest, to believe that she might be safe. She thought about the twists of fate that had led her here, about the danger she had faced, and about the man who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere to save her. There was gratitude, yes, but there was also a deep curiosity, a need to understand who he was and why he had chosen to help her. Sleep came slowly, fitfully, but it came, and as she drifted off under the shade of the trees, with the distant hum of the desert around her, she realized that she had been given a second chance, a chance to survive, to see another day, to discover that even in the harshest, most unforgiving places, kindness could appear like a lifeline. The cowboy stayed nearby, watching the sky change colors, the orange and pink hues bleeding into the purple of approaching night. He didn't say much, didn't force conversation. He simply remained a silent guardian, a steady presence in a world that had been nothing but danger moments before. She had no idea who he really was, where he came from, or why he had appeared when she needed him most. All she knew was that he had saved her, and for now that was enough. Hours later, as the stars began to pepper the night sky, she finally allowed herself to hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't helpless anymore. And somewhere in the vast, endless desert, a man she had just met was quietly ensuring that she would survive the night. The first hints of dawn stretched across the desert, softening the harsh shadows and painting the sand in pale golds and pinks. She woke slowly, her body stiff and sore from the night spent under the makeshift shelter. The cool morning air felt refreshing against her sunburned skin, and for a moment she almost forgot the ordeal of the previous day. But then the memory came rushing back, the relentless heat, the fear, the hopelessness, and she realized just how close she had come to being lost in the desert forever. She turned to look at the cowboy, who was already awake, sitting a short distance away, quietly tending to his horse. He had a calm and steady presence, a kind of quiet strength that made her feel safe even in this barren, lonely place. She had spent the night thinking about him, trying to piece together who he was, but there were no obvious answers. He had arrived without warning, offered help without question, and stayed nearby without intrusion. There was a sense of humility in him, a simplicity that contrasted with the unexpected competence he had shown when she was at her most vulnerable. "Good morning," he said softly, not looking up at her immediately, his voice carrying a gentle warmth. "Morning," she replied, her voice still hoarse from dehydration and the exertion of the previous day. She tried to sit up, wincing slightly as her muscles protested, but he was there in an instant, steadying her with a firm hand on her back. "Take it slow," he advised. "Your body needs a little time. You didn't get much rest yesterday." She nodded, grateful for his careful attention. It was strange how quickly she had begun to trust him, how naturally she felt safe with this stranger who had appeared in her darkest hour. The desert, which had felt like a vast, indifferent place, now seemed almost bearable because of his presence. After a few moments, he offered her more water and some simple food he had brought with him, a small piece of bread and some dried fruit. She accepted gratefully, her stomach empty and aching. She had eaten little the previous day, too consumed by fear and the effort to survive. As she ate slowly, she noticed the care with which he moved, the quiet competence in everything he did. He was skilled, confident, and aware of every detail of his surroundings. It made her feel small, fragile, and yet profoundly grateful that fate had placed him here at the right moment. Once she had regained a little strength, he suggested they move a short distance to a spot where the terrain was easier and offered better shade. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she had the energy, but he encouraged her gently, his calmness giving her the courage to keep going. She followed him, each step heavy but deliberate, feeling the support of his presence as they walked together. As they moved, she tried to learn more about him without being intrusive. "Do you live out here?" she asked cautiously. He gave a small smile, almost amused by the question. "I do most of the time," he said. "I like the quiet out here, the space. It gives you time to think, to breathe." She nodded, understanding the sentiment even if she couldn't yet relate fully. Her life in the city had always been loud and busy, filled with deadlines, responsibilities, and a constant pressure to perform. The desert, with its vast emptiness and unyielding heat, had terrified her at first, but now it seemed almost inviting in a strange way, especially with someone to guide her. The path they took wound through rocky outcrops and sandy stretches, but he navigated it effortlessly, pointing out dangers like hidden holes and sharp rocks. He moved with the kind of ease that only came from deep familiarity, and she found herself relying on him more and more, not just for physical guidance but for reassurance. Every so often, he would glance back to make sure she was keeping up, and every time she caught his eye, she felt a little less afraid. By late morning, they reached a small oasis, a cluster of low trees and a natural spring. Water trickled gently, cool and clear, forming a small pool. She bent down eagerly, cupping her hands to drink, feeling the refreshing liquid revive her from the inside out. He watched quietly, giving her space but remaining close enough to intervene if needed. For the first time in more than a day, she felt something like hope taking root. The desert was still harsh, but there was a possibility of survival, a chance to recover and regain strength. She sat on a flat rock, letting the cool water soothe her parched lips and throat. "Thank you," she said softly, almost to herself. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone would do if they could, but you were lucky." She studied him carefully, noticing small details she hadn't seen before, the way his hands moved confidently when handling the horse, the way his eyes scanned the horizon, alert to any change. He was clearly experienced in the desert, capable of surviving and thriving in a place that could easily kill someone unprepared. And yet he moved with humility, never boasting, never drawing attention to himself. There was something mysterious about him, a sense that there was more to his life than this quiet, rugged existence. As the hours passed, they shared small pieces of conversation. He asked about her journey, her reasons for being out here, and she spoke cautiously, trying not to reveal too much but still feeling the need to explain herself. She talked about her life in the city, her desire to escape, and the longing for something different, something more real. He listened with patience, never interrupting, never judging, and in return he told her stories of life in the desert, the rhythms of nature, the challenges of living off the land, and the satisfaction that came from hard work and independence. It was an odd sort of companionship, born out of necessity, yet growing into something more. She felt a strange comfort in his presence, a connection that didn't require explanation or forced intimacy. Just being near him, listening to his voice, and following his guidance was enough. For the first time since she had been stranded, she felt a sense of calm, a sense that she might actually make it through this ordeal. By late afternoon, they had covered a considerable distance. Her energy was returning, though she still moved carefully, aware of the strain her body had endured. He suggested they rest again, this time under a larger cluster of trees that offered more substantial shade. She lay down, feeling the soft sand beneath her and the gentle rustle of leaves above. He handed her a small cloth to wipe the sweat from her face, and she accepted it gratefully. As she rested, she couldn't help but notice the quiet ways he showed care, small gestures that spoke volumes. The way he arranged the blanket to shield her from the sun, the way he checked her water bottle and offered more before she even had to ask, the way he stayed alert, even while she slept. It was clear that he was not only skilled in survival but deeply considerate, thinking of her needs even while managing his own. She began to ask herself questions about him, questions she didn't yet have the courage to voice. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why was he out here alone in the desert? And most importantly, why had he chosen to help her, a stranger, without hesitation? There was a quiet mystery about him, a depth that she sensed but couldn't yet understand. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature began to cool slightly, offering some relief from the oppressive heat of the day. They stayed in the shade, sharing small talk and silent companionship, each moment building trust between them. She felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before she had been stranded. The desert, once a place of terror and isolation, now held a strange promise, anchored by the presence of the man who had saved her. Eventually, he suggested they continue moving, not far, but enough to reach a safer spot for the night. She agreed, understanding that resting too long in one place could be dangerous. They traveled slowly, carefully, and she followed his lead, learning to trust his instincts. Every so often he would point out a detail she might have missed, a safe place to step, a route that avoided loose rocks, a patch of shade. She felt herself growing stronger, more aware, more capable, though she knew it was his guidance that kept her safe. By early evening, they reached a small clearing with a shallow canyon on one side. He set up a small camp, arranging blankets and supplies to make the area safe and comfortable. She helped as best she could, grateful for the opportunity to contribute, though she was still weak from the previous day's ordeal. As the sun set, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. She had survived, at least for now, and she owed it entirely to him. That night, as they sat by a small fire he had built, he shared more stories about life in the desert, the routines of ranch work, and the quiet joys of solitude. She listened, captivated, realizing that he was not just a skilled survivalist but someone who had chosen a life of independence and reflection. There was a depth to him that fascinated her, a combination of strength, humility, and wisdom that she had rarely encountered. She felt herself opening up more, sharing her fears, her regrets, and her hopes for the future. He listened, never interrupting, never judging. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection forged through the shared experience of the day, the danger, and the relief of survival. For the first time, she felt that she was truly being seen, not just as someone in need but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and resilience. As night fell, they prepared to rest. She lay on the blankets, feeling exhausted but safe, and he kept watch quietly nearby, ensuring the camp remained secure. The desert night was cold, but the presence of another human being made it bearable. She realized that trust, once earned in the midst of fear, could bring comfort and hope even in the harshest conditions. Sleep came slowly, but it came, bringing rest and a sense of renewal. And as she drifted off under the stars, she knew that her life had changed forever. She had been saved, not just physically but emotionally, by someone who had appeared when she needed help the most. And though she didn't yet know who he truly was, she felt a growing bond, a connection that would shape the days to come. The morning light filtered softly through the trees, casting long streaks across the desert floor. She woke slowly, the previous night's rest having revived some of her strength. Her body still ached, but there was a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there the day before, a sense of hope, of safety, and of being cared for. The man who had saved her was already awake, moving quietly around the camp, tending to the small fire and checking the horse. She watched him for a moment, noting the calm, deliberate way he went about his tasks. Every movement was precise, confident, yet gentle, as if he had learned to live in harmony with this harsh land rather than fight it. She felt an unexpected admiration for him, not only for his skill but for the quiet humility he carried with him. There was no show of strength, no need to impress. He simply existed in this place, competent, capable, and kind. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to sound steadier than she felt. "Morning," he replied, glancing at her briefly before returning to the fire. "You slept well?" She nodded, grateful for his casual tone. It was comforting to hear the ordinary words of someone who had appeared extraordinary in the last day. The contrast between the mundane and the heroic fascinated her. She had been alone, terrified, and now, here was someone who had not only saved her life but treated her with respect and patience. They ate a simple breakfast together, bread, dried fruit, and some water he carried with him. She marveled at how organized he was, how prepared for the desert's unpredictability. It was clear he had spent a lot of time here, learning the land, understanding its moods, and mastering its dangers. She had relied on him completely the day before, and now she began to realize how much skill it took to survive, to remain safe, and to care for someone else in a place so unforgiving. Once they had eaten, he suggested they continue moving toward a safer area where they could find more reliable shelter and water. She agreed, eager to regain her confidence and strength, though still cautious of her own limits. She noticed how he adjusted his pace, allowing her to set the rhythm, waiting patiently if she faltered or grew tired. His awareness and attentiveness were comforting, a reminder that she was no longer entirely alone. As they walked, the desert revealed itself in ways she hadn't noticed before. Small flowers clung to the rocks, their colors muted but beautiful. Birds called from hidden perches, their songs sharp and fleeting. Even in the harshness of the sun and sand, life persisted, resilient and determined. She began to see the desert not only as a threat, but as a place with its own quiet beauty, and she felt a flicker of respect for the land she had once only feared. They stopped briefly by a shallow creek, the water clear and cool. She knelt to drink, letting the liquid wash away the lingering dryness and fatigue. He remained standing a few feet away, scanning the horizon with careful eyes. She felt a wave of gratitude for his vigilance. In her mind, she began to understand that his actions were not just about competence, they were about care. He had chosen to protect her without question, without expectation of reward. As they resumed their journey, she began to ask more about him, testing the boundaries of their newfound connection. "Do you always live out here?" she asked cautiously. He paused, looking thoughtful. "Most of the time," he said finally. "I like the quiet. The land is honest. It doesn't lie or deceive. You learn quickly if you don't respect it." She listened, intrigued. There was a depth to his words, a subtle wisdom that spoke of experience and reflection. She realized that surviving in the desert required more than skill. It required patience, observation, and understanding. She admired him more with each passing moment, recognizing that his presence was the product of both talent and humility. Hours passed as they moved together through the desert. She felt herself growing stronger, regaining confidence in her ability to walk, to endure, to survive. He offered encouragement when she faltered, never criticism. When the terrain became uneven or treacherous, he pointed out safe paths and guided her step by step. His patience was remarkable, his attentiveness constant. She could feel the trust between them deepening, forming naturally through shared experience rather than forced conversation. By mid-afternoon, they reached a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, the desert stretching endlessly, dotted with rocks, scrub, and distant hills. She paused, taking it all in, feeling the sun on her face and the wind brushing against her skin. It was a rare moment of calm, a pause in the chaos of survival, and she felt a strange sense of wonder. He stood beside her, watching the same view, silent but present. She felt an urge to speak, to break the quiet, but she found herself content in the shared silence. It was comforting to be near someone who did not rush words or demand explanations, someone whose presence alone was enough. After a long pause, she finally spoke. You seem like you know this place completely. How long have you been out here?" He smiled faintly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Long enough to understand it," he replied. "The desert teaches you quickly if you're willing to learn. It's not easy, but it's honest." She nodded, realizing the truth in his words. There was a purity in his life, a simplicity that she had never known in the city. Everything here demanded respect, attention, and patience, and he had mastered it all without arrogance, without pretense. It made her respect him even more. As they descended into the valley, she noticed subtle signs of life: animal tracks in the sand, the distant flight of a bird, small plants clinging stubbornly to the rocks. She began to feel a connection to the land, understanding in a small way why he had chosen this life. The desert was harsh, but it was also honest, and it revealed truth in ways the world beyond could not. They stopped again at a small patch of shade near a rocky outcrop. He helped her sit, offering water and letting her rest. She noticed how carefully he observed her, his eyes scanning for signs of fatigue, dehydration, or injury. It was not just competence, it was empathy, a genuine care for her well-being. She felt a warmth in her chest, a growing appreciation for this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her. She began to open up more, sharing bits of her life, the reasons she had left the city, the pressures she had tried to escape, and the fear that had followed her even here. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never offering judgment. When he spoke, it was with quiet wisdom, often in the form of observations rather than advice. He seemed to understand that sometimes being heard was more important than being guided. By late afternoon, they set off again, moving toward a more permanent shelter he had mentioned, a small structure he used when staying in the desert for extended periods. She was curious, but tried not to seem too eager. There was something about him that felt deliberately private, and she didn't want to push boundaries too quickly. The journey was slow but steady. She learned to follow his lead, noticing the little ways he made the path safer, the small precautions he took, and the careful attention to detail that had kept them both safe so far. She began to appreciate not just his skill, but the quiet confidence and humility that accompanied it. It was clear that he had faced challenges in this land before, and had emerged capable and wise. Yet he remained unassuming, never flaunting his abilities. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they reached the small shelter, a simple structure made of wood and stone, blending naturally with the desert. It was modest, yet it radiated practicality and care. Inside, it was cool and shaded, a relief from the relentless sun. She felt a wave of gratitude, not just for the safety it offered, but for the thoughtfulness and foresight of the man who had guided her here. He showed her around, pointing out where she could rest, where water and supplies were kept, and how to stay safe. She noticed that even this simple place had touches of comfort: a blanket folded neatly, a small stove for cooking, and a few personal items that hinted at a life lived thoughtfully and deliberately. It was a blend of practicality and care, much like the man himself. As they settled in, she couldn't help but ask cautiously about him. You're very capable." "I can see that, but why do you live out here? Why not somewhere else?" He looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Some people need the world to be quiet. Some people need to be reminded of what matters. Out here, life is simple, honest. You see things clearly." She considered his words, feeling a flicker of understanding. He was not just a man surviving in the desert. He had chosen this life for its lessons, its clarity, its truth. And yet there was a mystery about him, a sense that there was more beneath the surface, something he hadn't yet revealed. As night fell, they sat outside the shelter, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert was silent, vast, and beautiful, and she felt a sense of peace she had never known. She realized that the connection she felt with this man was growing, built on trust, shared experience, and the understanding that they had both faced challenges, different ones, but challenges nonetheless. She lay down on a blanket, Exhausted but safe, and he remained nearby, tending to the small fire and the horse. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her survival but for the companionship, the care and the unexpected bond that had formed between them. The desert had been unforgiving, but it had also brought them together, and she sensed that this was only the beginning of a story far more profound than she could yet imagine. The next morning, the desert greeted them with a soft light that painted the sand in golden orange. She woke feeling stronger, her body recovering after a night of rest and proper hydration. The previous days had been terrifying, exhausting and overwhelming. But now there was a sense of calm, a quiet confidence that came from having survived and having someone beside her who could guide and protect her. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the horse with care and precision. She watched him quietly, noting the way he moved with ease and purpose, his hands sure and steady even as he handled the horse and checked the supplies. There was a rhythm to his movements, a sense of familiarity and comfort in every action. She realized that he had clearly spent many years navigating this harsh land, understanding its moods and mastering its challenges. It was awe-inspiring to witness, and she felt a deep respect for him, mixed with a curiosity she could not yet name. After breakfast, he suggested they travel toward a location he called the ranch, a place he had mentioned the day before but never described in detail. She was curious, but he seemed to prefer letting her focus on her own recovery first, so she didn't press for answers. They packed their few belongings and set out, moving carefully through the desert terrain. The sun was strong but tolerable, and the wind carried a dry, cooling touch that offered some relief. As they walked, she tried to observe him more closely, noting the little things that made him different from anyone she had ever met. He didn't just move through the desert. He belonged here. His presence felt natural, as though the land had molded him as much as he had mastered it. There was a quiet confidence in his eyes, a patience in his actions, and a humility in the way he interacted with her. He never rushed, never demanded, never acted superior. He simply existed in this place, skilled and self-assured, yet kind and considerate. Hours passed as they journeyed together. She asked questions cautiously, testing the boundaries of their growing trust. "Do you have family?" she asked softly, curious about the man who had appeared so mysteriously in her time of need. He glanced at her briefly, a faint smile crossing his face. "Not here," he said. "Family is important, but sometimes people find their place in unexpected ways. Out here I've made a different kind of home." She listened carefully, sensing that there was more to the story than he was revealing. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, a complexity hidden beneath the calm exterior. She could feel it in the way he observed the land, in the careful thought behind every movement, and in the quiet wisdom that seemed to guide his actions. He was more than a skilled survivalist. He was someone who had made deliberate choices, someone whose life held stories she could only guess at. By mid-afternoon, they reached a low ridge that overlooked a valley dotted with trees and a distant building. Her breath caught as she took in the sight. The building looked modest from afar, blending into the desert landscape, yet there was a sense of permanence and care in its construction. She could see fences surrounding parts of the land, and the distant shapes of horses moving gracefully in the open fields. "That's the ranch," he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of pride. "We'll rest there for the night." She was both relieved and curious. Relief because she would finally have a place to rest safely, and curiosity because she wanted to know more about the man who had guided her here. She followed him down the slope, noting the way he moved confidently over uneven terrain, always aware of obstacles and hazards. His experience and skill were evident in every step, and she felt a growing sense of admiration for him. As they approached the ranch, she began to notice details that hinted at something more than just a simple desert life. The fences were sturdy and well-maintained, the stable clean and organized, and the grounds around the house neat and thoughtfully arranged. There was a sense of order and care that went beyond basic survival, suggesting that the man who had saved her lived a life of intention and means. When they reached the entrance, he opened the door and gestured for her to step inside. She hesitated for a moment, unsure what to expect, but the warmth of the interior and the coolness from the shaded walls immediately offered comfort. The room was modest but well-furnished, blending practicality with subtle elegance. There were no ostentatious decorations, yet the quality of the furniture, the careful arrangement of items, and the cleanliness of the space spoke volumes about the man's lifestyle. He motioned for her to sit while he prepared water and a simple meal. As she rested, she couldn't stop herself from studying the surroundings. It was clear that the man had resources far beyond what she had imagined. The craftsmanship of the furniture, the quality of the supplies, and the organization of the ranch all hinted at a level of wealth that seemed at odds with the rugged, humble exterior he had shown in the desert. Finally, as they ate, she found the courage to ask, I hope this isn't too forward, but you live here alone and you manage all this? He paused, setting down his cup, and met her gaze. I do, he said simply. Most people don't see what's behind the surface. They see a cowboy, the desert, a simple life, but there's more than meets the eye. I've built this life deliberately, to give myself space and freedom. Money doesn't define it, it's the choices, the quiet, the independence that matters. She listened, absorbing every word. She felt a mixture of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. She had never expected the man who had saved her life in the desert to also be someone who had created such a remarkable existence. The revelation shifted her perception completely. The humility he had shown in the desert had not been a mask. It was a reflection of his character, a deliberate choice to live authentically despite wealth and means. The afternoon passed in quiet conversation. He told her stories of managing the ranch, caring for the animals, and living in harmony with the land. She began to see the complexity of his life, the balance between wealth, skill, and humility, the dedication required to maintain such a place, and the deliberate choices that had led him to this path. She realized that his presence in the desert had been a perfect reflection of who he was, capable, kind, and deeply aware of his environment. As the sun began to set, they stepped outside to watch the sky transform into shades of orange, pink, and purple. She felt a profound sense of peace, a connection to the land, and a growing respect for the man who had saved her life. He remained beside her, quiet but attentive, and she felt a bond forming, built not just on survival, but on trust, understanding, and shared experience. Later, as night fell and the stars began to fill the sky, she explored the ranch under his guidance. He showed her the stables, the fields, and the small orchard he tended. She noticed again the care he put into everything, the attention to detail, and the deliberate choices that made this ranch both functional and beautiful. It was a reflection of him, skilled, humble, capable, and thoughtful. They returned to the main building where he prepared a simple dinner. She marveled at how effortlessly he moved through his environment, managing both the practical and the unexpected with ease. As they ate, she began to ask more about his life, about the choices he had made, and about what had led him to the desert. He answered cautiously, sharing enough to give her insight without revealing everything. She sensed there were stories he kept private, experiences that had shaped him deeply, but she respected the boundaries he set. After dinner, they sat outside once more. The desert was alive with sounds she had not noticed before: the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the gentle whisper of wind through the trees. She felt a sense of wonder and gratitude. The desert, once a place of fear, had become a place of learning, reflection, and connection. She realized that her own journey had changed as well. The fear and desperation she had felt in the desert had given way to resilience, trust, and a deeper understanding of herself. She had discovered inner strength she hadn't known she possessed, and she had been reminded of the power of human kindness. The man who had saved her was more than a stranger. He was a guide, a protector, and a quiet teacher of life's deeper truths. As they prepared for the night, she lay on a blanket under the stars, feeling the cool desert air and the sense of security that came from being near him. She reflected on the past days, the terror, the uncertainty, the relief of being rescued, and now the surprising revelation of his life and character. She felt a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and curiosity for what was to come. She realized that this moment, this connection, was rare and precious. In the harshest environment, in the face of danger and isolation, she had found a companion who embodied courage, humility, and strength. And she knew that whatever the future held, this experience had changed her profoundly. She had been saved physically, yes, but she had also been awakened emotionally and spiritually, reminded of the resilience of the human spirit, and the unexpected kindness that could appear in the most unlikely of places. As she drifted into sleep, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in days. She had survived the desert. She had discovered a bond with someone remarkable, and she was ready to face whatever challenges the next day might bring, with strength, courage, and trust in the man who had changed her life forever. The next morning, she woke to a sky painted in pale gold, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The previous days had been a whirlwind of fear, survival, and discovery, but now she felt something new: confidence, clarity, and a sense of connection she had never imagined possible. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the horse with his usual calm efficiency. She watched him quietly, noticing the effortless way he moved, the attention he paid to even the smallest details, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. "Morning," he said softly, glancing at her and offering a faint smile. "Morning," she replied, feeling steadier, stronger. Her voice no longer cracked with fear, and her movements were more deliberate. The desert that had once felt like a prison now felt alive, full of lessons and subtle beauty, and she was beginning to see it through his eyes. After a simple breakfast, he suggested they take a ride across the ranch, showing her the land he had cultivated and cared for. She climbed onto the horse carefully, guided by him, and felt a thrill of excitement she hadn't experienced in days. The wind on her face, the sun warming her skin, and the rhythm of the horse beneath her created a sense of freedom she hadn't realized she had been craving. As they moved across the fields, she began to ask questions, wanting to understand more about the man who had saved her life and the life he had built here. How did you end up out here?" she asked, keeping her tone gentle. He looked out across the valley, thoughtful, as if considering how much to reveal. "I needed space," he said finally. "Space to think, space to live without noise. Out here, life is honest. It's not about appearances or expectations. It's about knowing what matters and having the freedom to follow it." She nodded slowly, sensing there was more beneath his words. There was a depth to him, a story he hadn't fully shared, but she respected that. She had learned that trust could not be rushed, and she felt a growing patience and curiosity for the life he had chosen. As they rode, he pointed out small details: the growth of the trees, the paths animals used, and hidden springs that provided water, even in the driest months. She realized that he not only survived here but thrived, and that it was a combination of skill, observation, and respect for the land that made it possible. She felt a sense of admiration she couldn't fully put into words. By midday, they returned to the main house. She noticed again the subtle elegance of the place, the thoughtfulness in every corner, and the quiet evidence of wealth that contrasted sharply with the humility and simplicity he had shown in the desert. It was clear that he could have lived anywhere, with comfort and ease, yet he had chosen this life deliberately. It made her respect him even more, and her curiosity about him grew stronger. As they rested, he finally spoke of something that had been on her mind since she had first arrived. "You might be wondering why I helped you," he said, his tone calm but steady. She nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "I was lost, alone, and completely unprepared. You appeared out of nowhere. I don't understand why you chose to help me." He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers with honesty. "Because it was the right thing to do. There was no reason not to. You needed help, and I had the means to give it. Sometimes that's all there is to it." She felt a warmth in her chest at his words. There was no hidden agenda, no expectation of reward. His kindness had been genuine from the start, and the revelation of his wealth and independence didn't diminish the act. It highlighted it. He had the choice to ignore her, to pass by, but he had chosen to act with courage and compassion. As the afternoon wore on, she began to notice small signs of his life that she hadn't seen before. A ledger on the table, neatly kept, correspondence carefully organized, evidence of charitable work and involvement in local communities. She realized that he was not only skilled and capable, but also deeply responsible and thoughtful. His life was built on principles she admired: integrity, humility, and a quiet commitment to making a difference. She felt a growing desire to understand him, to know the person behind the cowboy exterior, but she also felt a profound respect for his privacy. The trust between them had grown organically, and she knew that patience would reveal more than pressing for answers too soon. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, he suggested they take a walk through the orchard. She followed him, noticing the careful attention he paid to each tree, the pride in his steps, and the gentle way he moved through his land. It was clear that this place was more than a home. It was a reflection of his life, his choices, and his character. They walked in silence for a while, the quiet companionship comforting. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before, a feeling that the world, even in its harshest places, could offer beauty, trust, and connection. The desert, which had once been terrifying, had become a place of learning, reflection, and unexpected grace. Finally, she found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since she first arrived at the ranch. You live here, you take care of everything, and you seem different from what I expected. Are you wealthy? He paused, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yes, he said simply. I have resources, enough to live comfortably and to help others if needed. But that's not what matters here. What matters is how you live, the choices you make, and the people you care for. Money is just a tool, not a measure of who you are. She felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. The man who had saved her life, who had shown such humility and kindness, was someone who could have lived in luxury anywhere. Yet he had chosen this life of independence, skill, and quiet purpose. The revelation deepened her respect for him and reinforced the trust and connection that had grown between them. That evening, as they sat by the fire outside the house, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the fear and desperation of being lost in the desert to the safety and security of the ranch, the days had been filled with lessons, challenges, and moments of profound human connection. She realized that the experience had changed her, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. She had discovered resilience, trust, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had become a guide and protector. He spoke of the desert again, of the lessons it taught, and of the importance of living with awareness and respect. She listened intently, absorbing not just the words but the wisdom behind them. She understood that survival had been only the beginning. The deeper lesson was about trust, empathy, and the courage to act with integrity even when no one is watching. As night fell, she lay on a blanket under the stars, feeling the cool air and the sense of security that came from being near him. She thought about the bond that had formed between them, a connection built on trust, shared experience, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of kindness come from the simplest decisions.